There is a particular kind of stillness that belongs to a house where a woman is expecting a child. It is not silence exactly, it is something softer than that. It is the sound of a kettle warming on the stove in a Victorian kitchen, the creak of a chair being pulled closer to the window for better light, the faint rustle of cotton being folded and set aside. If you had stepped into the parlor of a middle-class home in England, sometime around the 1870s or 1880s, you might not have known, at first, that anything had changed. The curtains would be drawn back the same way. The tea set would be arranged on its tray, just as it always was. The garden beyond the window would still be heavy with roses or damp with November rain, depending on the season. So, what was different? What did it actually feel like to carry a child in that world, in those rooms, in that particular kind of quiet? England, 1882. A young woman sits in a parlor with floral wallpaper and heavy curtains. She has known for several weeks now, though she has not said the words aloud to anyone outside her closest circle. In the Victorian era, pregnancy was not announced. It was understood. The language around it was layered with softness and discretion. A woman was said to be in an interesting condition or in a delicate condition. She might be described as expecting or simply with child. Among close friends, someone might whisper that she was in the family way. These were not evasions. They were a kind of tenderness, a way of holding something sacred in careful hands. Pregnancy was considered deeply private, and a woman's body, even in its most natural state, was shielded from public discussion as a matter of dignity. And so the early weeks passed quietly. She may have felt the familiar pull of nausea in the mornings, or a sudden tiredness that arrived without warning in the middle of the afternoon. She may have noticed that the smell of certain foods, once comforting, now turned her stomach. There were no medical tests to confirm what she already sensed. She simply knew, and the women around her, her mother, her sisters, her closest friends, they knew too, in the way that women have always known. Her mornings began much the way they always had, but with small, quiet adjustments. Before dressing for the day, she would slip into what was called a wrapper, a loose-fitting gown that buttoned all the way down the front. It was high-necked, long-sleeved, and made of cotton or soft wool. The wrapper was the first garment of the day for many Victorian women, pregnant or not, but it became especially beloved during those months of waiting. A woman could put it on herself, without help, and it did not press against her changing body. In the early hours, before callers arrived, she could move through the house in comfort, tending to small domestic tasks or sitting with a cup of tea and a piece of toast beside the fire. As the day went on and there was a chance of visitors, she might change into something a little more formal. But here is where the Victorian expectant mother had a quiet ally. The tea gown. This was a loose, flowing dress inspired by the aesthetic movement, made of soft fabrics like silk or fine wool, and it did not require a corset underneath. The tea gown had originally been designed for women to wear during afternoon tea at home, but it became, in the most gentle and unspoken way, the garment of pregnancy. It draped over the body without clinging. It moved with a woman rather than against her, and because it was already fashionable for at-home entertaining, wearing one did not draw attention to the reason she was wearing it. Victorian novels of the time even used the tea gown as a subtle signal to readers. When a character appeared in one, it often meant she was expecting, and everyone understood. For women who did continue to wear structured clothing, there was the maternity corset. This was not the rigid, waist-cinching garment that comes to mind when we think of Victorian underclothes. The maternity version was different. It had its lacing placed on either side of the abdomen rather than at the back, so a woman could loosen it gradually as her belly grew. The boning was minimal, and the back panel bowed outward gently. It was designed to support, not to squeeze. Think of it as something closer to what we might call a belly band today. But there is a detail about this that is easy to miss, and it says something lovely about the way women adapted. Before home sewing machines became widespread, most women's dresses were already made with hidden drawstrings and removable darts. The clothing was built, from the start, to be altered. A woman did not need an entirely new wardrobe. She simply loosened what she had, let out a seam here, adjusted a gather there, and carried on. There was a practicality to it that was quiet and resourceful. Now, what filled her days during those months of waiting? This is where the story becomes truly beautiful. Because what a Victorian expectant mother did, above almost anything else, was sew. She sewed the baby's layette. That word comes from the French, meaning a small box or coffer, and it referred to the collection of everything a newborn would need. Tiny gowns, caps, flannel petticoats, knitted booties and stockings, soft cotton napkins, receiving blankets. Each piece was made by hand, stitch by stitch, in the months before the baby arrived. This was not a chore. It was a ritual. It was the way a woman began to know her child before the child was born. Every hem she turned and every seam she pressed was a kind of conversation, a way of saying, "I am ready, I am here, I am making room for you." And then there was the christening gown. This was the centerpiece of the layette, the garment the baby would wear to its baptism, and it was almost always made entirely by hand. Even women who owned a sewing machine chose to hand-stitch this gown. One reason was beautifully practical. The gown was small and compact enough to fit inside a needlework bag, which meant it could travel from room to room with the mother throughout the day. She could work on it in the parlor in the morning, carry it to the garden in the afternoon, and pick it up again beside the lamp in the evening. It went where she went. The christening gowns of the mid-Victorian era were decorated with a style of fine white embroidery called Ayrshire work, which involved delicate needlework fillings and cutwork that looked almost like lace. Later in the century, the gowns became even more elaborate, with rows of tiny pin tucks and lace insertions running down the skirt and white embroidery covering the bodice. A mother would spend weeks, sometimes months, on a single gown. And because families in the Victorian era were large, often 5 children or more, that same christening robe would be packed away carefully after the baptism and brought out again for the next child and the next. It became a family heirloom passed down through generations. Think about that for a moment. A woman sitting in a chair by a window in 1882, stitching a gown that her great-granddaughter might one day wear. While the sewing filled the hours, the nursery was being prepared in another part of the house. Victorian maternity manuals offered surprisingly detailed advice on how to set up a baby's room. The walls were best left whitewashed, plain white plaster that could be freshened with a new coat of lime wash each spring for cleanliness. Painted walls were the next best thing, and marbled paper with a coat of varnish was considered perfectly acceptable. What was not recommended was heavy wallpaper, which was thought to harbor dust and insects. The cradle itself was often made of wickerwork, light enough to be moved from room to room if needed. It sat on a simple frame and was lined with cotton or linen. The mattress inside was stuffed with horsehair, which was firm and easy to clean. Some mothers added a small pillow of wash leather filled with horsehair as well, especially for the months when a baby would begin teething. The bedding was kept separate from the rest of the household laundry and aired in a different room while the baby was out for a walk or a visit. For wealthier families, there might be both a day nursery and a night nursery. The day nursery was where the children spent their waking hours, filled with a rocking horse, simple wooden toys, and sometimes a painted frieze along the walls showing animals or nursery rhyme characters. The night nursery was quieter, plainer, and closer to where the nurse or the mother slept. And then there was the matter of choosing the monthly nurse. This was a woman hired specifically to attend the birth and care for the mother and baby during the first weeks afterward. She was not a midwife exactly, though some had midwifery experience. Her role was more domestic than medical. She managed the lying-in room, kept the household running smoothly during those early days, and made sure the new mother rested. Finding a good monthly nurse was a serious matter, discussed at length among friends and family. Recommendations were passed from woman to woman, and a trusted monthly nurse might attend several births within the same social circle over the years. As the months progressed and the pregnancy became more visible, the expectant mother entered what was known as confinement. This did not mean she was locked away. It meant she withdrew from public life, from dinner parties and church services and walks through the town center. She stayed home. And in many ways, this is the part of the story that history tends to frame as lonely or restrictive. For a while, it could be. The quiet of the house could settle in heavily, and letters from this era show women writing to their mothers and sisters with a longing for company and conversation. But confinement was not isolation. Friends came to her. In a world where paying and receiving social calls filled a large part of a woman's week, the callers did not stop simply because she was expecting. They arrived in the afternoon, were shown into the parlor, and found her sitting comfortably in her tea gown. Tea was poured, news was shared. Advice was given, gently and from experience. The women around her had, in most cases, been through this themselves. They brought small gifts for the layette, offered opinions on nursery furnishings, and sat with her while she sewed. She also read. The Victorian era produced a remarkable number of maternity and motherhood guides, written by advice experts, hospitals, and religious institutions. These manuals covered everything from how to manage morning sickness to how to decorate the nursery, from the proper conduct of a new mother to the best way to introduce solid food to an infant. One especially popular guide, Elizabeth Scoville's 1896 book called Preparation for Motherhood, even included advice on what hairstyle to wear during labor. Scoville noted that during the weeks of confinement, many women left their very long hair unbraided, which led to terrible tangles. Her solution was charmingly specific. At the first signs of labor, the mother should part her hair down the middle at the back, braid it into 2 firm plaits, and tie them tightly. She promised that even after several days without brushing, the hair would come out smooth and untangled. If you are subscribing because you enjoy this kind of history, you are going to love what is coming next on this channel. By the final weeks of pregnancy, the lying-in room had been prepared. Fresh linens were laid on the bed. The monthly nurse had arrived and settled into the household. The cradle stood ready in the corner. And the layette, that collection of tiny garments sewn over months of quiet afternoons, was folded and waiting in a drawer. When the time came, it happened at home. Nearly all babies in the Victorian era, whether born to wealthy families or working families, were delivered in the bedroom. The monthly nurse attended. Often the mother's own mother was there as well, or a sister, or a close friend. It was a room of women. The atmosphere was kept calm and warm. Fresh water was heated. Clean cloths were prepared. And when the baby arrived, the mother was changed into a fresh nightgown and, if she was cold, given something warm to drink. Then she was left in quiet. Scoville wrote that the newly made mother needed perfect rest for several hours, and that only a brief visit of 5 minutes should be permitted in those first hours. The lying-in period that followed lasted anywhere from 5 days to 2 weeks, depending on how the mother was recovering. She stayed in bed. She was cared for. The monthly nurse managed the household, tended the baby, and made sure the mother ate and slept. It was a cocoon of rest, a pause in the rhythm of daily life that was considered essential and non-negotiable. And then, when the mother was well enough to leave the house again, there was one final ceremony, the churching. This was a church service, usually a short and simple one that marked a woman's first public appearance after giving birth. It was a blessing, a formal welcome back into the life of the community. She dressed carefully. She walked to the church. And when she returned home afterward, the confinement was officially over. She was herself again, and also someone new. The baby was baptized in the gown its mother had stitched by hand, the one with the Ayrshire embroidery or the pin tucks and lace. The cap was tied beneath its chin. The family gathered, and then the gown was folded, wrapped in tissue paper, and put away for the next time. The author, Lydia Child, writing in her 1831 book called The Mother's Book, offered one piece of advice that still feels quietly radical. She said that babies should never be spectators of anger or of any strong passion at all. She believed that from the moment of birth, a child's heart was open and ready to receive impressions, and that everything it witnessed in those early days would leave a mark. She urged mothers to keep their conscience and their heart as pure as possible in the company of their child, not as a performance of perfection, but as an act of tenderness, a way of sheltering something new and unfinished from the weight of the world. There is something in that idea that reaches across centuries. The notion that the first gift you give a child, is not a gown or a cradle, but the quality of the air around it, the calm of the room, the steadiness of the hands that hold it, the softness of the voice it hears first. These women sewed and waited, and walked through their gardens, and poured tea for their friends, and braided their hair, and held still in rooms that smelled of lavender and clean cotton. They did not have what we have now. They had something else, a slowness, a nearness to the physical world, a faith that preparing for a life could be a kind of prayer. If that kind of quiet, steady, beautiful history stays with you, click the video on your screen now. And if this is your first time here, subscribe so you do not miss the next one.